The Tudor era in England gets a lot of Hollywood treatment. Think lavish costumes, dramatic power struggles, and maybe even a glimpse of Shakespeare. But before you pack your bags for a time-traveling adventure, let's peel back the curtain and see what life was really like for most people. Sure, compared to the constant warfare that plagued England before the Tudors, things were a bit more peaceful. Peace is a good thing, no doubt. But for the vast majority of the population, life remained a daily grind. We're talking about 90% of folks toiling away on farms in tiny villages. Not exactly the jet-setting lifestyle we see in history documentaries. Then came a major shift in the social landscape. The traditional system of common land, where everyone had access to grazing and resources, started to disappear. This meant some people lost their way of life and the familiar, if perhaps slightly uncomfortable, routine of farm life. The answer for many? Head for the bright lights of the big city. Places like Bristol, Liverpool and London were booming, promising a new chapter filled with opportunity. But hold on a second. City life wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Imagine streets overflowing with garbage, a constant assault on the nostrils, and diseases spreading faster than rumors about the latest royal scandal. It wasn't exactly a walk in the park, or a stroll down a cobbled street for that matter. And speaking of royals, those powerful Tudor monarchs, let's just say they weren't exactly known for their chill vibes. Laws were more like suggestions that could be bent or broken depending on the king or queen's whim. Disagree with Henry VIII about the number of wives a man should have? Well, let's just say punishment could be a bit permanent. So, the Tudor era was undoubtedly a time of change, but for the average person, it was a change riddled with challenges. The next time you see a picture of a fancy Tudor gown, remember the person wearing it probably had to dodge a rather unpleasant pile on their way to a royal gathering. Maybe that historical period is best enjoyed from the comfort of our own well-lit, well-ventilated living rooms. Henry VIII was very particular. Swiping left and right on dating apps can be a pain, but imagine a time where your version of Tinder was a painted portrait. Buckle up, because we're diving into the dramatic dating world of Tudor England, where setting your friend up on a blind date could literally get your head lopped off. Thomas Cromwell's story is a cautionary tale for anyone who's ever been pressured to set up a friend. Cromwell's journey is a rags-to-riches story. He rose from the humble beginnings of a blacksmith's son to become a powerful advisor to King Henry VIII. Imagine the Tudor era equivalent of a high-powered political consultant with a Rolodex full of potential queens. That was Cromwell. But with great power came great responsibility, and Cromwell's most fateful task was finding the king a new wife after the death of his third spouse, Jane Seymour. Unlike our modern dating pool of carefully curated profiles and witty bios, Tudor matchmaking relied on oil paintings. Yes, Cromwell's job was essentially to play matchmaker based on portraits of potential queens. These portraits were often commissioned specifically to showcase the desirable qualities of a future bride, and artists might have been known to embellish a bit to secure a sale and potentially a royal favour. In 1539, armed with a potentially flattering portrait, Cromwell thought he'd found a perfect match for the king, Anne of Cleves, a German princess. The marriage was a strategic move aimed at bolstering alliances with Protestant states in Germany. Cromwell, hoping to maintain his position and perhaps even gain more favour, likely saw this as a surefire success. There was just one very big hitch. When Henry finally met Anne in person, things didn't go as planned. Perhaps the portrait was overly flattering. Perhaps Henry's tastes had changed. The man did go through wives like some swipe through Tinder profiles. Perhaps there was simply no chemistry. Whatever the reason, there was no spark. History doesn't record Anne's feelings on the matter, but one can only imagine the awkwardness and maybe a touch of relief on her part for dodging a potentially unhappy marriage. The disastrous outcome of this royal matchmaking fell squarely on Cromwell's shoulders. In the unforgiving world of the Tudor court, Disappointing the king could have deadly consequences, and that's exactly what happened to Cromwell. He was arrested, falsely accused of treason, among other charges, and ultimately beheaded for his matchmaking fail. So, the next time you think online dating is tough, be thankful you don't live in Tudor times. At least a bad profile picture won't get you a one-way trip to the executioner's block. Consider yourself lucky you can simply swipe left and avoid a whole lot of royal drama. Remember the pressure of online dating. Imagine your success hinging on a single, potentially misleading photo. That's exactly what Thomas Cromwell faced in Tudor England, where a botched matchmaking attempt led to his demise. Europe in the 16th century was a tinderbox of religious tension. The Protestant Reformation had challenged the dominance of the Catholic Church, and King Henry VIII of England found himself caught in the middle. Cromwell, a staunch Protestant and Henry's chief advisor, became a key figure in navigating this religious minefield. One of Cromwell's primary goals was to secure alliances with Protestant states in Germany to counter the growing power of the Catholic Habsburg dynasty. This is where Anne of Cleves, a German princess, enters the picture. Cromwell, ever the political strategist, saw an arranged marriage between Henry and Anne as a way to solidify these alliances. Unfortunately, Cromwell's matchmaking strategy relied on a rather unreliable source: a portrait of Anne painted by Hans Holbein the Younger, Henry's court artist. In the world of Tudor Tinder, where a king's approval could mean the difference between life and death, artists might have been incentivized to use a bit too much artistic flattery to make their subjects more appealing. When Henry finally met Anne in person, it was a disaster of epic proportions. Perhaps the portrait was a gross exaggeration, perhaps Henry's tastes had changed, or maybe there was simply no chemistry. Whatever the reason, Henry was far from impressed. History doesn't record Anne's feelings, but one can only imagine the awkwardness, and maybe a touch of relief for dodging a potentially unhappy marriage. This matchmaking fail landed squarely on Cromwell's shoulders. In the unforgiving world of the Tudor court, disappointing the king was a gamble with your head. Henry, already fuming about the failed marriage, turned on Cromwell with a vengeance. He accused Cromwell of treason and heresy for deceiving him with Anne's portrait. Cromwell's fall from grace was swift and brutal. He was arrested on flimsy charges, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and executed on July 28, 1540. Rumours swirled about the execution. Some say his enemies sabotaged the event by providing a dull axe, while others debate how many blows it took to get the job done. Thankfully, unlike Cromwell, the portrait painter Hans Holbein the Younger escaped unscathed. This fact casts a shadow of suspicion on Henry's motives. Perhaps the portrait was merely an excuse for the king to get rid of Cromwell, a powerful advisor whose Protestant leanings didn't exactly win him friends at court, or maybe even a way to deflect blame for his own, performance issues in the bedroom. So, the next time you think online dating is tough, remember the story of Thomas Cromwell. At least a bad profile picture won't get you beheaded, but beware of the perils of playing matchmaker, especially for a king with a volatile temper and a history of marital dissatisfaction. Thought crimes. King Henry VIII wasn't exactly known for his chill vibes, but things got downright scary after his split from the Catholic Church. This wasn't your average breakup. It was a full-blown religious revolution with a body count that would make even the most hardened history buff wince. Henry's primary motivation for the breakup was a simple one. He wanted a divorce. Sorry, Catherine of Aragon, but it's me, not you. The Catholic Church wouldn't budge on the issue, so Henry, in a move that would make Machiavelli proud, decided to create his own church, the Church of England, with himself as the supreme head. This power grab wasn't just about his marital woes, it was about consolidating his control over both religious and political matters. He wanted to be the ultimate authority figure, answerable to no one but himself, and maybe God on a good day. To solidify his grip on power and silence any dissent, Henry introduced the terrifying 1534 Treason Act. This act basically turned England into a thought crime dystopia. Denying Henry's position as supreme head of the church, even hinting that he might be a heretic or a tyrant, all became capital offences punishable by death. People had to walk on eggshells around the king, constantly worried about a stray comment landing their head on the chopping block. Imagine living in a world where a grumpy social media post about the king could get you a one-way ticket to the executioner. The Treason Act wasn't just a scare tactic. Henry used it as a weapon to eliminate anyone who dared question him or his religious reforms. Some prominent figures who met their demise include Sir Thomas More, a respected lawyer and politician. More refused to acknowledge Henry as the head of the church and ended up beheaded in 1535. His execution sent a chilling message to anyone who dared to hold on to Catholic beliefs. John Fisher. A leading Catholic theologian, Fisher also opposed Henry's religious reforms and shared the same fate as More in 1535. These high-profile executions showed that even the most respected figures weren't safe from the king's wrath. Anne Boleyn, Henry's own second wife, wasn't spared. Facing fabricated charges of adultery and treason, she was executed in 1536, paving the way for Henry's next wife, Jane Seymour. This act showed that not even those closest to the king were immune from his paranoia and desire for absolute control. This is just a glimpse into the carnage. Hundreds of influential people lost their lives or faced imprisonment thanks to Henry's paranoia and insatiable thirst for absolute power. People who had previously enjoyed positions of privilege and respect found themselves living in constant fear, wondering if they'd be the next to face the executioner's axe. Henry's reign of terror cast a long shadow over English history. The brutal suppression of dissent under the Treason Act helped to create a climate of fear and suspicion that lingered long after his death. It served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths to which a ruler would go to silence opposition. Weird ways to go. Tudor England was a period of explosive social and economic change. As people flocked from rural villages to bustling cities, they encountered new technologies and conveniences that hadn't existed before. But amidst the progress lurked hidden dangers, one of the most insidious being the readily available and often misunderstood poison known as ratsbane, or arsenic. Arsenic wasn't some fancy high-tech invention. It was a naturally occurring compound that found its way into various household products. Its versatility made it a seemingly attractive solution to a variety of problems. Urbanization meant more people living in close quarters, and with them came an unwelcome surge in the rat population. Arsenic, with its potent ability to kill these unwelcome pests, became a staple in many Tudor homes, as common as flour or tea. Unfortunately, the lethality of arsenic wasn't lost on those with more sinister intentions. This readily available poison became a dark option for those seeking to eliminate a rival or unwanted relative. A discreet sprinkle in a cup of wine or a strategically placed dollop in a dish could mean a permanent goodbye, a fact not lost on those with malicious intent. Believe it or not, some folks even used arsenic medicinally. With limited understanding of human anatomy and the properties of various substances, some treatments involved ingesting small amounts of arsenic. Needless to say, the potential benefits were vastly outweighed by the deadly risks. The problem with arsenic lay not just in its potency, but in its deceptive appearance. In the dim lighting of a Tudor kitchen, it could easily be mistaken for other household staples, leading to tragic accidents. Take the unfortunate case of Barbara Gilbert, a housewife from Leicestershire. While preparing a meal, she reached for a bowl filled with what she thought was flour, only to discover it was a deadly dose of rat poison. One taste test later, poor Barbara became another victim of a lethal case of mistaken identity. Another story recounts the tale of a woman who, in the dead of night, tried to ease her sick husband's thirst by reaching for a familiar jug. Tragically, in the darkness, she grabbed the wrong container, one filled with rat poison instead of soothing ale. her act of kindness turned into a devastating mistake. Arsenic wasn't always used by accident. Sir Thomas Overbury, a writer and courtier, wasn't so lucky. Imprisoned in the Tower of London in 1613, he was deliberately poisoned with arsenic, a calculated move to eliminate a potential threat. His story highlights the darker side of Tudor life, where a readily available poison could be used as a political tool to silence dissent. These stories paint a vivid picture of the dangers lurking in everyday life during the Tudor era. Living in a rapidly changing world presented a whole new set of challenges, and keeping oneself and loved ones safe from a misplaced sprinkle of rat poison was just one of the many ways life in Tudor England could take a deadly turn. Sir Thomas Overbury's story bridges the gap between the Tudor and Stuart eras. Initially a close friend of King James I's favourite, Robert Carr, Overbury fell out of favour and ended up imprisoned on trumped-up charges. Here's where things get dark. Fearing Overbury would expose her scandalous past, a powerful countess named Frances Howard allegedly orchestrated his demise. Arsenic, the poison of choice for many a Tudor villain, found its way into Overbury's food and drink, leading to a slow and agonizing death. While some of his jailers faced execution for their role in the plot, Howard, thanks to her noble status, somehow escaped punishment. This story serves as a chilling reminder that even in the aftermath of the Tudor period, the powerful could get away with murder, literally. Smoking meats was a common practice, with hefty slabs of bacon called flitches hanging proudly in chimneys. However, these weren't just decorative displays. One unfortunate servant named Elizabeth Brown discovered the dangers of misplaced bacon firsthand. While warming herself by the fire, the rope holding a heavy flitch snapped, sending it crashing down and crushing her. This tragic accident highlights the ever-present dangers lurking within seemingly ordinary household items. Clocks were a newfangled invention in Tudor times, and like any new technology, they came with their share of growing pains. Clock towers were popping up all over the place, and maintaining these giant mechanisms was no easy feat. One chilling incident in 1513 illustrates the potential perils. A young labourer named John Townsend was tasked with repairing the clock mechanism in Bungay, Suffolk. Unfortunately, something went terribly wrong. The mechanism slipped from his grasp, plummeting down the tower and landing squarely on the head of a young boy named William Brett. Despite medical attention, the boy succumbed to his injuries. The Bungay incident wasn't an isolated event. As clockmaking became more widespread, so did accidents involving falling clock parts, serving as a grim reminder that progress often comes with a price. These stories offer a glimpse into the unexpected dangers that plagued people in Tudor England and beyond. From the ever-present threat of poisoning to the perils of household items and new inventions, life in those times was a constant gamble. Henry VIII's madness. Being in Henry VII's court during his reign was no walk in the park. Just look at what happened to poor Thomas Cromwell, who felt the brunt of Henry's anger over a painting that didn't please him. But Cromwell wasn't the only one who faced Henry's wrath. Plenty of other advisors, nobles, politicians, and even clergy found themselves on the wrong side of the king's temper. To understand why Henry VIII was so keen on chopping heads off, you have to understand his health. He started off as a pretty fit guy, but all those jousting matches took a toll on him. He racked up quite a few injuries, leaving him in constant pain and struggling to move around. One nasty leg wound in 1536 never healed right, likely giving him an ulcer and causing even more agony. Plus, Henry wasn't exactly watching his waistline. Over the years, he piled on the pounds, tipping the scales at a hefty £400 toward the end. His love for rich feasts didn't help matters, and his weight gain led to a laundry list of health issues like heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. But it wasn't just his body that was struggling. Henry battled with his mind too. Some say he wrestled with depression, anxiety, and paranoia, which might have been linked to his physical pain. So, here you have a king who's paranoid, overweight, and feeling pretty down. all while desperately trying to secure a male heir. He was so fixated on this goal that he didn't hesitate to shake up the whole country's religion to marry who he wanted. It's no wonder his court wasn't the most stable place to be. Curious medicine. During the Tudor times, arsenic, also known as rattabana, wasn't just for killing rats or pesky nobles. It doubled up as a medicine too. It came in various forms, as a skin treatment, a pill to swallow, or even as a beauty product. Believe it or not, many women used arsenic-based stuff to lighten their skin, aiming for that fashionable pale look. Queen Elizabeth I was said to be a fan, but some suspect her love for arsenic-laced makeup might have contributed to her demise from blood poisoning. People thought arsenic could help with skin troubles like psoriasis or eczema. They either rubbed it on their skin or swallowed it in small doses. But while it might have eased inflammation, it also brought on nasty side effects like skin irritation or even poisoning. Now imagine this. Bloodletting was another popular treatment back then. Yep, folks believed draining some blood would balance out the body's humours and make them healthier. These humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, were thought to govern health. But instead of jokes, humour here means bodily fluids. Doctors thought things like diet and weather messed with these humours, causing sickness. For instance, chowing down too much meat was believed to heat up the body with too much yellow bile, leading to fevers. So they'd either make a tiny cut or use suction cups or leeches to suck out blood. But sadly, this often made things worse, causing infections and other serious problems instead of curing folks. So much for Tudor-era health wisdom. Bloody Mary. Before the brunch favourite, Bloody Mary cocktail came into existence, there was another Bloody Mary in history, Queen Mary Guy. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and she had a rather bloody reputation, though not in the cocktail sense. Mary was a devout Catholic, and when she became queen from 1553 to 1558, she was determined to bring Catholicism back to England. Her father, Henry VIII, had switched England to Protestantism, but Mary wasn't having it. She undid many of her father's Protestant-friendly laws and brought in Spanish advisors who were big on Catholicism. Her persecution of Protestants was intense. She made it illegal to question Catholic teachings, especially the idea that bread and wine could literally turn into Jesus's body and blood. Many Protestants refused to accept this belief and ended up being arrested. They were given a brutal choice: convert to Catholicism or face being burned alive. The most famous victims of Mary's persecution were the Oxford Martyrs, 3 Protestant bishops who were burned at the stake in 1555. Their gruesome deaths were meant to scare other Protestants into silence. In total, hundreds of Protestants were executed during Mary's reign, with some estimates reaching over 600. Mary's reign wasn't popular, and there were protests and unrest across England. But before any major rebellion could occur, Mary died, possibly from uterine cancer. Her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth I, took over and swiftly reversed Mary's policies, making Protestantism the official religion of England once again. The Priest Hunter. During Queen Elizabeth I's reign, the tables turned, and now it was Catholics who faced persecution. One of the most feared figures in this time was a man named Richard Topcliffe, also known as the Priest Hunter. Topcliffe was no ordinary guy. He was a member of Parliament and held various government positions, including being a Justice of the Peace. But his main job was to hunt down religious dissenters, especially Catholic priests. He wasn't known for being gentle. He used torture to force confessions out of people he suspected. His favourite method was something called Topcliffe's persuasion, which involved hanging a person from the ceiling and dropping them repeatedly until they talked. Once he got what he wanted, he made sure the accused were swiftly sentenced to death. Topcliffe took pleasure in the suffering of his victims. He attended their executions, making sure they faced the full punishment. For those convicted of treason, the punishment was especially gruesome. they'd be hanged, but not enough to pass out, then cut into pieces while still alive. But Topcliffe didn't stop there. He enjoyed humiliating his prisoners, taunting them and forcing them to kneel before him. He even had a network of spies to report on suspected Catholics, using any means necessary to achieve his goals. His actions led to the arrest and execution of many Catholic priests, including the Jesuit priest Edmund Campion, who was tortured and killed in 1581. Topcliffe's reign of terror was a dark chapter in Elizabethan history. Witch trials. During the Tudor era, there was a period of intense fear and superstition known as witch mania. Regardless of whether someone was Catholic or Protestant, almost everyone agreed that witches were bad news. Thousands of women were accused and executed for supposedly practicing witchcraft during this time. These witch hunts were fueled by mass hysteria and bizarre accusations. One particularly strange trial was that of the witches of Warbois in 1593. 4 women from the village of Warbois were accused of flying on broomsticks and casting spells on animals. The accusers, 2 young girls, claimed to have been bewitched by these women, suffering hallucinations and fits. Despite the outlandish claims, the women were found guilty and sentenced to death. Their trial and execution were big news, serving as a warning against the dangers of witchcraft. Similar trials occurred in Scotland, like the North Berwick witch trials between 1589 and 1591. Over 70 people were executed for allegedly plotting to kill King James VI through witchcraft. These trials were heavily influenced by the king himself, adding to the hysteria. The fear of witches was worsened by social and economic changes happening at the time. Monasteries were closing, land was being privatized, and capitalism was on the rise. Many people were struggling, looking for someone to blame, and witches became convenient scapegoats. Tudor England was a time of upheaval and uncertainty, where even the supernatural seemed to pose a threat. If you want to know more about Tudor England, just drop a comment below. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.